course, the big showdown this spring will come as a result of the need to raise the debt ceiling for the 7th time in this country in 5 years' time. Republicans for months now have been saying not a chance. But for the first time, we are seeing at least a couple of the big names in the party beginning to hedge their bets on that, while others are girding for a fight.
If the House is going to move an increase in the debt limit, I think we have a responsibility to cut spending.
So I'm not interested in raising the debt ceiling on the hope that a promise will be fulfilled at a later time. I am only interested in raising the debt ceiling if we get concessions on spending, on real controls to get our fiscal situation turned around and headed in the right direction.
We need to have a showdown at this point that we're not going to increase our debt ceiling anymore. We are going to cut things necessary to stay within the current levels, which is over $14 trillion. So this needs to be a big showdown.
And we welcome now firebrand Republican Congressman from Texas, Ron Paul. Congressman, how will the debt ceiling debate go, and will it go beyond kabuki theater in real life?
Well, it'll continue. I don't think they're going to come up with a solution. But, you know, this idea of raising the debt limit if they get some concessions, it doesn't get me too excited, because I remember in the 80s, if my memory serves me right, there was an agreement with Reagan that he would give a tax increase as long as for every dollar of tax increase, there would be $2 of tax, spending cuts. That didn't happen. The deficit exploded. So I would suspect that if there is some type of agreement in order to get the debt level increased, it probably won't hold much water. Besides, they're not even talking about very much cut. The maximum that's been mentioned is $100 billion. And when you have $1 trillion of deficit being accumulated in about 7 months, it really doesn't add up to enough.
And you and I could go on for the next 5 or 10 minutes and talk about how screwed up all these different things are. We'd agree about a lot of it, and not much would change. But at the same time, you obviously have a tremendous mantle of power and authority, and I'm part of a party now that's accumulating power. And if nothing else, I have the benefit of having a microphone and a national platform at this point. My question for you is, how do you turn the increased awareness about the sort of things that you, myself, or anybody else who's sort of into these sorts of things, monetary policy flaws, the military-industrial complex, corporate control of government, et cetera, what can we do to turn the increasing awareness of these problems into action? How can we help you actually start to move from awareness to some sort of effective response?
Well, that's the big issue. Overall and over time, I think it's an educational effort. But, there was a big explosion of education once the crisis hit in 07, 08. All of a sudden, many of those things that many of us had been talking about came about, and then they paid more attention to it. In other words, sometimes they don't learn but the hard way when the crisis hit. Now, of course, many of us are concerned about the bond bubble, the very, very low interest rates, and the pressure on the dollar. But they say, oh, no, we'll get by. And it looks like they won't learn until the crisis hits. So I'm still concerned about that. I think the conversation is getting slightly better. We have some better people here, but I am not anticipating that all of a sudden the markets and the country are going to be reassured and employment is going to start growing and real growth is going to occur. I think we're a long way off from that, but until we get an understanding that it's in the interest of all Americans to cut back and cut spending, that's what we need to do. But as soon as you do that, somebody's ox is being gored and they don't like it, and that's the political reality.
If you were to look at the younger people in this country who are the ones who have the greatest risk at the ongoing indulgence of the policies that you criticize, beyond voting for this guy or that guy, what would you advise somebody, a young person in this country who is aware of the problems that you talk about, to do with their time, to do with their career, to do with how they spend their time and talent to try to deal with this?
Well, that is a major question. I tell people they have to be engaged and they have to understand the system to know what to do. But first of all, they have to know how to take care of themselves. And I think this is the reality that's sinking in, that the young people are realizing the government's not going to take care of them. They can't be guaranteed, as long as I pay my Social Security taxes, I'm going to be okay. So that means they have to have a trade. They have to be able to take care of themselves. But the most I can offer and ask them for the support is to get the government out of the way. If we are skeptical of government promises, we have to say, well, at least let the people take care of themselves. For instance, in medical care, if they can't deliver on the medical care, which they can't, at least let us get some that let the young people opt out. If they can't provide Social Security for us in a lifetime, why can't the young people get out of those systems and take upon themselves the responsibility? But those are major events, and I think that they're not going to give serious consideration until we, we'll really have a major crisis.
Specifically, do you think there's any way out of this financial situation without some form of default or debt restructuring? And if in fact that's the only way out, is it better to do it sooner than later?
Governments always default when they have this amount of debt. Matter of fact, I think Bernanke works on the whole premise that he wants default because he wants inflation. He's begging and pleading that he sees prices go up. But in reality, that lowers the real debt. So the government defaults all the time. Most people think of default if the government quits sending the checks out. And if the government closed down, they might have to wait a week to get their check. That's a different thing, and it's probably not going to happen. But the default comes anyway. The debt will go down. The real debt will go down because they are going to debase the currency, devalue the currency. They're continually doing it. It's just not happening fast enough for Bernanke. He wants it to happen immediately, which to me is an immoral, irresponsible position to try to destroy the value of people's savings. We're supposed to be encouraging savings. That's where the capital comes from. So we need to change attitudes. We need to repeal Keynesianism. We need to believe in freedom and sound money and understand why you don't need a central bank to do this central economic planning, and then we could work our way out of here. We could get ourselves back on our feet again within a year if we would just get the government out of the way.
Specifically, will you subpoena documents from the Federal Reserve from your perch in the House subcommittee?
Yeah, I think it may come to that, but I think the reasonable thing to do is request them first. They did release some of the figures, from last year's bill that was passed, and we have information, and to me, it seemed complete. So I think my first step is to make precise requests and ask them to explain what kind of collateral they have and who really got bailed out. We've learned a lot already of how a lot of that money went overseas. They bailed out foreign banks where our people are losing their homes. So there's something messed up about that. So if they don't come through, yes, I think we should talk about a subpoena, and hopefully it won't come to that, and that they will give me the papers that I asked for.
Two more questions for you. There seems to be a divide in the Tea Party between folks who use rhetoric like yourself, which again can be sort of versions of libertarian rhetoric, versions of fairness, sort of cheat or compete type of rhetoric, and then there's another version of Tea Party rhetoric which doesn't seem that vested in monetary principles or integrity of the currency or integrity of competition in capitalism, and tends toward more social and sort of vaguer issues. How important do you believe it is to draw a distinction between your version of the Tea Party and some of the other interpretations?
Well, I think it's pretty important because I think there are diverse groups within the Tea Party movement. The people who come to my meetings and organizations, they're interested in foreign policy. They're very interested in the Fed. But I think most of the Tea Party people are interested in excessive debt and the Federal Reserve. But when it comes to some of the social issues, I think there's a disagreement. But the challenge, for me, the big challenge is on foreign policy. And young people that I talk to say that we should, question it. But I think we're making inroads there too. Some of the Republicans now are starting talking about, maybe this military-industrial complex is a little bit too big. Maybe we ought to cut back. Yep. So slowly we're making inroads. But I work on the assumption that all empires end for financial reasons, and when they get stretched too far, and I think we are, and I think we will come down, our empire will end because we're bankrupt rather than because we have deliberately changed our policy. I argue we ought to just change our policy on money, welfare, and warfare, and we could solve our problems rather gracefully.
The last question for you. They say, times are tough when the kids are moving back home with you. I understand your 47-year-old son will be moving in. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm glad to help him out. He has to decide about his family. He has a senior in high school who will graduate in June. So he thought, if I could stay with you for 6 months and give me a breather to find out where I'm going to stay and what I'm going to do with the family, he says, can I stay with you? And I said, yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Will you give him a curfew?
No, I think I'm needing to get him in there at least in time for me to find out how he's going to vote the next day. Maybe so I'll have to do that.
Listen, Congressman, thanks as always for the time. I appreciate it.
Sure thing.
All right, Ron Paul.